We've been thinking about, writing about, and talking about the NFL's gambling policy, a couple of items from over the weekend. And I'm getting good feedback from people in the league, privately, obviously, because it's a delicate issue for the NFL. But this thing, look, and here's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to cause trouble for the sake of causing trouble. I'm trying to cause trouble in the name of prompting change, because I believe there are too many flaws and defects in the league's gambling policy and in the procedures utilized for educating players and others. The mere fact that we've seen these suspensions, it tells you that something is missing when it comes to properly educating everyone involved. And we know about the players who've been disciplined. My understanding is there have been employees who have been quietly fired by the league office at a minimum for running afoul of the gambling policy. And I really do believe at the end of the day, there needs to be a greater commitment to making sure our people know what they can and can't do versus being able to say, hey, we've informed everyone of what the obligations are. It's up to them to figure out what these rules are and comply. No, this isn't a standard HR policy where all you have to do is get a piece of paper that someone signed acknowledging they've received the policy. This is one that requires sufficient and thorough education so there aren't these issues. I mean, from the standpoint of your players, you want your best players available to play. You don't want guys arbitrarily gone because they truly don't understand the nuances and the contours of the gambling policy. You want Jameson Williams, for example, to be available for the first 6 weeks of the season for the Detroit Lions. You want every great player to be available. And if you have these landmines out there that you haven't properly told the players where they are, all you can say is, well, they've signed the acknowledgement form that they've received the map, even though the map isn't all that clear as to where the landmines are. They've signed the paperwork. Don't blame us. It's not our fault. They need to be smarter. They need to properly understand this. Somebody needs to explain it to them, their agent, the union, whoever. Baloney. The league needs to explain it, and the teams need to explain it. And some teams are taking the NFL's convoluted map of where the mines are and rewriting it. Sean Payton basically admitted that a couple of weeks ago in discussing the gambling policy during a press conference with the Broncos, that they've distilled it into something understandable. Gets back to the point I've been making about what players are allowed to do. Well, you can gamble on other sports as long as you don't do it while you're at work, as long as you don't do it at the facility, as long as you don't do it while you're traveling. And if you do, you're looking at least a 6-game suspension. Again, why give the players that right to gamble when it is basically a ticket to the minefield? Just close the door to the minefield. Just say no entrance to the minefield. If you want to play in the NFL, stay out of the minefield. What are they going to say? Nah, we'd like to dance around in the minefield. We'd like to go gamble. We'd rather not play in the NFL. That's an easy way to solve a lot of this. But then comes the issue that as I sit, and I know I should probably get a better hobby because I sit around thinking about the gambling policy, but I'm concerned about the long-term best interest of the NFL. Let me just do an aside here, because this occurred to me today when we wrote the item about this loophole that seems to exist once coaches are in that purgatory after they're fired by one team before they're hired by another. The way the gambling policy is written, looks like coaches who were fired by a team can go bet on the NFL if they want to during that interim period where they're in John Gruden's Fired Football Coaches Association before they get another job. And what occurred to me while I was writing that, and look, people have pointed out the hypocrisy, and it's clear, it's rank, it's unavoidable. The NFL is in bed with the sports books, getting millions of dollars for sportsbook partnerships. You have owners who own significant chunks of these sportsbook companies that started as daily fantasy or whatever. Then once the floodgates opened for legalized gambling, DraftKings and FanDuel and the other major companies embraced it. So how do you ever truly effectively tell your workforce you can't sample the offerings of these companies that are giving us millions of dollars for sponsorship and these companies that some of our owners have significant investments in? How do you ever have the right commitment? Because you know, as the league, you know how hypocritical it is. You know how ridiculous it sounds. I use the Olive Garden example. Olive Garden becomes a major sponsor of the NFL, and there are owners who are significant shareholders in Olive Garden, but none of the players and none of the employees of the teams of the league can ever eat at an Olive Garden. It kind of makes it hard to do a full-throated Olive Garden is bad seminar when you know, and everyone else knows, that Olive Garden is good for the upper reaches of the National Football League. So the only way out of this, truly, is to just turn their back on gambling altogether. Go back to the way that it was when gambling was illegal and all the bookies and the mob and everyone else was making money off of gambling and the NFL wasn't. The NFL is going to do fine without having these sportsbook partnerships. They're going to do fine. The owners will do fine without owning percentages of the sportsbook companies. The best way to do this right is to have a clear firewall between the NFL and gambling, but it's too late for that. Too late for that. There's too much money that's already been made. Roger Goodell's got this obsession that the NFL is going to be whatever it is, 25 billion, 28 billion, 29 billion per year in revenue. So you don't turn down a revenue stream. So what was my point? I had a good point, but now it's gone. But the broader point is this. We're trying to expose the flaws in the gambling policy in the hopes of rectifying them so the worst case scenario doesn't happen. So there isn't a Tim Donaghy scandal. So there isn't some new scandal with some new fact pattern that we're not aware of. So that the NFL doesn't have to contend with a federal agency that's created specifically to oversee the NFL and ensure that there's true integrity in the product. So we don't have to, although, hey, look, I mean, controversy sells. If there is some ambitious prosecutor out there that decides to take on the NFL over some flaw in the gambling policy that becomes a controversy and people are doing perp walks and having trials, that would be good for business, short term. Long term, it's not good for the NFL. It's not good for anybody. And that's why we keep harping on it. And NFL, if you're out there, if you're listening, and we know you are, you can either get mad at me and go complain about me to somebody because I'm criticizing you about your gambling policy, or you can take the criticism to heart and you can think of the best ways to improve and enhance your policy, the education, and everything that I've been pointing out and that others have been pointing out. I'm not the only voice in the darkness here, but the point is we're trying to make this better. We're trying to point out these flaws, and it's hard to do it because the NFL wants to circle the wagons around the money it's making from the sports books, while at the same time firing arrows out of that wagon circle at the players who dare to do the thing that the sportsbook companies want people to do. And I go back to Chris Sims' conspiracy theory from last week, and maybe he will join me in Howie Roseman's top 5 NFL conspiracy theorists. But the idea that the NFL wants players, not the NFL, yes, the sports books want players to gamble. So the NFL wants to let them gamble on other sports because players will lose more money than the average person because they have more money to lose. And we reported last week that someone in the league lost $8 million last year. So they are the whales. The sports books, the casinos, anyone who has gambling offerings is always looking for the whales, the ones who will lose big money and won't think twice about it, and they'll show up again and they'll lose more big money. And they've yet to figure out the lesson my father, the bookie, told me when I was very young. When it comes to gambling, you can't win. I remember going into a casino for the first time when I was 20 years old in Lake Tahoe. You look around, see how nice it is. It didn't take a whole lot of brain power, and trust me, at age 20, I didn't have very much of it. It didn't take a lot to look around and say, I know where this money came from to make this place so nice. All the suckers who were in here before me who thought they had a system, who thought they could win. At the end of the day, you can't win. Now I know there's a small percentage that somehow crack the code, that somehow have some system. And the House would probably like to glorify those folks to make other people think that they'll have a system, that they'll crack the code. They won't. At the end of the day, gambling has continued as an industry for decades and will continue as an industry for decades more to come because over time, you lose and they win. That needs to be part of the education that players get. Don't even do it. You shouldn't want to do it because you will lose. You will lose your money and they will win it from you. Does the NFL really want the players to get that message? Do the sports books that are paying the NFL millions for these sponsorships really want the players to get that message when the players are the ones that the sports books would like to prey upon? Again, the best solution, firewall. Too late for that, unfortunately. Maybe it will take a massive scandal to get some future commissioner to create the firewall that needs to be there between the NFL and gambling. We can only hope.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.